Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The federal government has shut down 22 times since 1976, but only a handful lasted long enough to disrupt paychecks. As furloughs stretch on, lessons from past shutdowns offer practical financial strategies to help federal families stay resilient. With advice on managing through uncertainty, here's Mike Meese, president of Armed Forces Mutual. Mike, it's great to have you back.
Well, good to be here, Terry.
We're having this conversation in the middle of a government shutdown. What has Armed Forces Mutual seen in the past? You've dealt with folks who've been through this and needed to call on you. What has the experience been?
We have, and it's interesting to note that there have been 22 government shutdowns since 1976. I experienced some of those here at Armed Forces Mutual. Also, those that I experienced while I was on active duty in the Army, where you weren't sure about getting paid and how all that was going to work out. It's kind of important to note that this is going to be one of the longer shutdowns. Only 4 of them lasted more than 15 days. And it appears that this will probably go to that period where by a week from Wednesday on the 15th is when at least the military won't get their mid-month pay. And 2 of the shutdowns stopped after 17 days, which is usually what happens when somebody doesn't get their mid-month pay. That puts a lot more pressure on political leaders to make a resolution.
There's certainly a lot of uncertainty around this particular shutdown. People don't know their status. People don't know the rules. But what is the key advice that you would give to folks who are in the midst of this and kind of not knowing how this is all going to play out?
Yeah, I think it's important to think of 3 things. The first is why you should have an emergency fund and be prepared for any kind of emergencies, to include a government shutdown. Now, if you're in this situation and you don't have an emergency fund, the second thing is be sure to assess your bills, your priorities, and communicate with all of those people that you may owe money to. And there are all kinds of opportunities. Many banks and credit unions are providing 0 interest loans if you've already had a direct deposit set up there. For those in the military, the relief societies like Army Emergency Relief, Navy, Marine Corps Relief Society are stepping in. Even the military post exchanges, they have what's known as the STAR card. They're allowing any service member that uses the STAR card at military commissaries to have a 0 interest loan on any expenditures in the commissary for 3 months. So there shouldn't be any reason why a military person that's around a commissary can't get the food that they need. And of course, if you need to, reach out to food banks and others to be able to make sure that your families are not food insecure.
Mike, one of the things that is different about this is the rise of AI since the last shutdown. And when people are in a sense of financial emergency, they may be more vulnerable to scammers. Can you talk about what folks are seeing?
Yeah, we do see a lot more people providing, here's a great way to make money very quickly, or here's a great way to get a loan. It's kind of a sophisticated version of the payday loan sharks that would be located outside of military bases. You need to be very, very skeptical of anything like that, because you can be vulnerable in this kind of a circumstance. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You need to work with the credible bank, credit union, organizations like Armed Forces Mutual or relief societies that you know are trustworthy.
Well, you mentioned payday lenders. Beyond that, what advice do you have for people, for services not to take advantage of or to avoid?
Well, again, you want to make sure that you're first prioritizing what you're spending your funds on, and not to just respond to the first thing that comes into your email, because that seems like the most important demand. Prioritizing food, shelter, paying your rent, and those kinds of things, or talking to the people that you owe the money to. That way you don't get taken by somebody who puts demands on your money, and that really is not the best way to spend it.
I'm speaking with Mike Meese. He's the president of Armed Forces Mutual. Well, that getting repaid is a topic of interest today. The White House is floating a memo that says maybe that 2019 rule that guarantees back pay for furloughed workers doesn't mean what you all think it means. Have you had a chance to take a look at that?
Yeah, I have. And first a disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer and it'll be up to lawyers and potentially courts to sort this out. But it seemed to me that it's very likely that the payment will take place for at least 5 reasons. The first is the law. When you look at the plain reading of the law, it appears to intend to pay workers. The second is precedence. It's only been used once, and that was back in 2019. And in fact, furloughed workers were paid. The third is the guidance. The Office of Personnel Management, OPM, actually published a 30-plus page long booklet just last month. And if you go to page 9 of that book, in the answer to one of the questions, the guidance from OPM says that furloughed workers will be paid, citing that 2019 law. The fourth thing is Congress, when they finally pass something that is approved by the president, will likely include a provision like they did in 2019 that says furloughed workers will be paid. And the fifth reason is you already see, I think, over 100 representatives from both sides of the aisle signing up for the Pay Our Troops Act, sponsored by Representative Jen Kiggins. And with that much bipartisan support for at least paying troops as well as DOD individuals, it's likely that Congress would support that.
Well, that is helpful reasoning and maybe a little bit of a bright spot. While folks are in the midst of this shutdown and really thinking about their emergency spending, it's also kind of a good time to do that personal financial audit, right? How should people be walking through sort of their broad financial readiness for something like this?
Well, if they have not done so already, it's important to look comprehensively at your budget, how much you're spending, how much your spouse is spending, where the sources of income are, and where the sources of expenditure are, so that you can really identify what is absolutely essential and what are nice to have kinds of things. And then by prioritizing that, you can have a good path going forward. Establishing an emergency fund so that you know where you can get funds if you need to, and potentially taking advantage of opportunities now to move those into higher interest savings accounts. Now with the interest rates still being up, are lots of good places to save those funds.
So what advice do you have to wrap it up for folks who are sitting in all of this uncertainty, maybe struggling with that positive attitude that we just talked about a minute ago?
Well, again, it's important to focus on what you can control, which is yourself, your family, the kinds of things that you do within your community, and working with those individuals and not passing that stress on to a lot of others. The things in Washington, they work themselves out. The longest shutdown was 35 days, and that was only a partial government shutdown. As they say, this too shall pass. It's difficult during this time frame, but we always see a light at the end of the tunnel, and I think everybody can take hope in that going forward.
I've been speaking with Mike Meese, the president of Armed Forces Mutual. Mike, thanks so much for your perspective and your sound advice.
Great. Thanks, Terry, and good luck to everybody that's out there dealing with this.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.